Hi, I'm Missy. I'm your friendly human design coach, and I'm here to offer you a great workshop today on how to uncomplicate your decisions using your human design to really know you're making the right decision. So if you don't already know what your human design authority is, which is your decision-making center, I do want you to just quickly go to mybodygraph.com, put in your information. It's going to give you a free chart that's going to give you a couple different pieces of information. So you don't need to worry about understanding all that information today. I'll show you exactly what you need on your chart in order to talk about your authority. But since we are talking about uncomplicating those decisions, it's going to be really helpful for you to know that piece of information before we get started. So you'll see on your chart, I'll show you exactly where that looks, but just go ahead and make sure that you either know your authority already, or you go ahead to mybodygraph.com and pull up a chart for yourself by entering your birth date, time of day you were born, as well as where you were born. If you don't know what time of day you were born, you can go ahead and just put in noon. For the purposes of today, there shouldn't be any major difference in terms of your authority. So I just want to get a quick pulse check in here as well, just about how much you actually know about human design. So go ahead and type in the chat. Is this the first time you've heard about it? Do you know a little bit about it? Like, do you know what your strategy and authority already are before you even went to the mybodygraph.com? Do you have a base understanding? Like, do you know what profiles are? Do you know what transits are? If so, then you can put C in the chat. Have you gone really deep into it? Like, have you had readings done on your own chart? Have you picked up a book and started to read through it? Or have you even gone to the level of answer choice E and saying that you've analyzed other people's charts? So now that I have that information, let me go back. There we go. So let's see what we have going on in the chat. All right, so most people, it seems like you've heard of it. This is either like the first time that you've really recognized it, or you know what your strategy and authority are, but you really aren't sure what else to do with it. And that's totally common. So I just want you to know that you're in good hands today. You don't need any background in human design in order to get the most out of today's workshop. That has to really do with breaking down your decision making. So as we go into this topic, I just want to make sure that you know that you are in the right place. And you know that this workshop is going to be helpful for you if you are somebody who has really gone back and forth with your decisions. You feel like, oh my goodness, I have all the information, but I'm really overwhelmed with all of my choices that are out there. I'm never really sure if I'm in the right one. And when I say decisions, this can be anything from what do we have for dinner tonight, to who's picking up the kids, to I need to switch careers and I have no idea what I'm going to do. So decision making definitely hits all different parts of our life. You also know that you're in the right place if you're just feeling really exhausted going back and forth on all those options. So not only do you feel like you've brought in a lot of information, you've done your research, but like your brain just keeps kind of going back and forth. You're like, well, I could go with, the chicken nuggets for dinner. Well, I could go with pizza. Well, again, it could be anything from that to, do I take this new job offer? Do I quit my job and look for a new one, right? Those are very, very different kinds of questions. But the great thing is that they still have the same decision-making behind them. So if you've been in situations where like you can't get out of your head, right, which is a very common phrase I hear from my clients, and you're just constantly weighing these options back and forth, this is going to help you. And if you're really looking for just a concise way to feel confident that you picked the right choice, I know a very, very common situation that comes up is, first of all, it's like, well, I got to make a decision, period. And then I think I made the decision, but I feel like there's 17 more options that I still need to go through, and I'm still not sure which is the right one. And I think maybe I made the right answer, but I don't know if I'm actually feeling good with it. So if any of those thoughts go through your head, then you are in the right place. So again, just go ahead and pop in the chat for me 1, 2, or 3, or a combination of them. If you have other reasons that you're here for today as well, I'd love to hear from those. All right, so let's see. So, all right, so definitely a lot of the weighing the options, that's a big problem. Looking for confidence. All right, great. I see these things. Well, welcome so much for being here. And as we get through this workshop today, we're really going to look at what that strategy is. So by the end of today, you're going to be able to apply an energetically aligned process to your decision making. So based on that authority information that I had you look up, you're going to know some overall strategies that you can actually use. You're also going to be able to know when you've made the right decision. And getting to that point where you can say, all right, so I've landed on, I'm going to switch jobs, right? I've landed on what my next step is. I've landed on, what car I'm going to buy, whatever it is. And knowing that it's really the right choice just relieves so much stress and pressure from those next steps. And also, as part of today, we're going to look at how you can use that strategy to really assess the pros and cons without feeling like you're missing everything. So sometimes what happens is that when people are going back and forth in their decisions, they're like, well, maybe I should get the Toyota, maybe I should get the Hyundai, maybe I should get the sports car, maybe I should get the minivan, depending on what's going on in your life and what your needs are. As we start to go back and forth in all those decisions, we oftentimes feel like the pros and cons kind of outweigh each other. And so therefore it's hard to really go one way or the other with the final decision. And then as you're processing that, you go, well, am I missing anything? Did I not think of this other factor? Is there something else important that I need to know? And so by learning your process with human design, that's going to help you work through that. So again, tell me in the chat, which of these resonates the most with you? What are you most excited to get out of today's session? And certainly if there's anything else, let me know that as well. All right, so yeah, you want to know that you made the right decision. I'm seeing that. You want to stop waffling, right? You want to stop going back and forth between those choices. You're just like, make a decision already. Yeah, I totally hear that in your brain. All right, well, that's exactly what we're doing today. So let's take a look. So because I want this to be a little bit interactive, as we go through this exercise, I want you to be thinking about scenarios that have happened to you and how you can apply your decision making to you. So just take a moment and think about 3 decisions that you come up with in the past week. They can be little, they can be big. And with those 3 decisions, I want you to rank them from easy to hard and think about what makes the easy one easy and what makes the hard one hard. So I'll give you a moment. Any 3 decisions you've been faced with this past week? Just very quick knee gut reactions. All right, so now I'd like you to put it in the chat. Think about that easy decision. What makes that easy one easy? Okay, yeah, it's always easy to pick your favorite food for dinner, right? I know I'm all about the Mexican, like you can give me Mexican food all day long. I'm always happy. Right, what are some other things that make it easy? So when we have things that resonate with ourselves all the time, that makes it easy, right? Things that are simple decision, things that only impact us, okay? Or you, right? If it impacts more people, it's going to be a little bit harder, but if it's just for you. All right, and so let's take that to the other side then. Okay, what are the things that make it hard? So if we look at the hardest decision or the biggest decision that you had, what made that tough? So I'm already seeing, again, if it impacts more people, it's going to be more difficult. If you don't know what other people's opinions are, that also is going to make it really difficult. Right. So those harder decisions, they tend to be the bigger things. They tend to be the things that will change your life permanently, like again, switching jobs. Whereas those easier things are more temporary and they're more finite and they only impact you as a person. So let's keep that in mind that as we move into these decisions, the harder the decision is, meaning the bigger it is, the more that it impacts more people, the longer it's going to impact your life. Those are the kinds of decisions that might take a little bit longer to learn how to apply these processes to, but still the processes that we're going to talk today apply exactly the same to the easy ones and the hard ones. So as we go through today's workshop, I want you to really think about the burning question that you would love to have definitively answered by the end of this workshop. So it could be one of the questions that you were working on earlier this week, or it might be something totally new. But take a moment and just write down what that burning question is. If you want to share it in the chat, you're welcome to, but this can certainly be a private question that I'd like you to just really sit with as we go through this workshop. Right? If you could have something concretely answered for yourself by the end of this workshop, what would it be? All right, great. So now that we have that written down, we have an idea of something that we want to assess. Let's talk about how we can really use the human design process to address this kind of question. So the first thing that we need to know is what your authority is in human design, right? If we don't know what the process is, then it's going to be very difficult for us to actually apply it. So human design is a system, and I know many of you are very familiar with it. So human design is a system that's been around since the 1980s, and it combines multiple aspects. It combines chakras, it combines the Kabbalah, it adds in the astrology points. And by integrating these multiple systems, human design has essentially up-leveled and become its own new massive system that lets you go really, really deep. So when we look at the process, the first thing is when we know what our process is based on our birth information, we start to demystify that decision-making process. So your authority is based on where your energetic centers are aligning and what's essentially consistent in your energy all the time. And that authority is going to be your inner compass. So it's the piece for you to know what direction you're going to be looking in for your decision. Now, if you're familiar with human design, you may also know your strategy. So for example, it might be responding, or it might be informing, or waiting for the invitation, depending on what your type is. And that strategy is going to guide you for when to take action. The authority helps you figure out which action is right to actually do. And again, it allows you to answer all the questions that you have. So there are 7 different types of authority, and they are in a hierarchy level. So for right now, I just want you to think about what is your authority. And so if you just went to mybodygraph.com, you'll see that on the right side, there's a chart, and there's actually a section in it that says authority, and that'll give you a particular word. So it might say solar plexus, mine says sacral, it might be your ego. So there's a couple different words that you'll see in here. And today we're going to focus on either the solar plexus or the sacral. So even with there being 7 types of authority, the vast majority of people fall into one of these 2 categories. So 45% of people are going to be a solar plexus authority. And so you can look at your actual chart and look at the text that's on the right of it. But if you have your picture, this is also how you figure out which one you are. So regardless of what other shapes you have, on the left side, if you have your solar plexus colored in, and that's the shape that I have circled there, then you are going to be a solar plexus authority. And if you are a solar plexus authority, you will always be a solar plexus authority, because that is at the top of the hierarchy of the 7. And 45% of people are already in this category. Additionally, the sacral decision makers, so those are the examples on the right. So in order to be a sacral decision maker, you first of all have your solar plexus white, that means it's undefined. And then you also have your sacral center colored in. So if you are a sacral decision maker, this is another 35% of people. So when we combine the solar plexus and the sacral, we're already looking at 80% of the people falling into essentially 22% of the decision-making processes, which is ironically a lot like the 80-20 Pareto principle. So when we take a look at these pieces in today's session, I'm just going to be focusing on these 2, because it is indeed 80% of people. Now, with that said, you're still going to benefit from today's workshop, even if you fall into one of the other categories. And this is why. Number one, a lot of people don't know that your authority can actually change. We oftentimes have external energies, actually we always have external energies that are influencing us. So those external energies can come from either other people who are interacting with our auras, or it can be from the planets that are constantly transiting overhead. So if you've ever wondered why like one day you feel like really excited and another day you feel really out of it, assuming that you've like slept well and there's nothing else going on, it literally can be the changing of the planets that impacts this kind of change. So because this is a hierarchy with the authority, people can go up the hierarchy, but they're never able to go down. So for example, I'm by nature a sacral decision maker. However, there are times when the planet aligns that I'm forced into the solar plexus authority, and I have to actually shift my approach. And honestly, that took me a long time to realize that that was the shift. And so that's one of the reasons I like to share with people. The other reason is that other people are going to fall into these categories. So even if you're another type, 80% of the people in your life likely fall into one of these two categories. So understanding how others react and how others make decisions allows you to be more respectful of their decision-making processes and not get frustrated when you're interacting with them. So now that we know what authorities we're talking about, so again, we're going to talk about the solar plexus authority and the sacral today. You know what your authority is because you looked at your My Body graph. You're able to follow along today and say, okay, what pieces are going to apply to me? What can I actually apply to this decision that I wrote down just a moment ago? So let's take a look at what these two types actually mean. So if I am a solar plexus authority, I am an emotional decision maker. And before you panic, that does not mean that logic doesn't have anything to do with your decisions. It just means that logic is not the final decision maker, okay? So you can use logic to support your emotions, to help you work through them, to go through the cycles. Just make sure that your final answer is not coming from the actual logic piece. Your actual answer, your final, like, yes, this is the solution I should follow, that is going to come from your emotions. And it's very important to remember that as a solar plexus authority, you are allowing your emotions to run. So this is just kind of a little diagram that I have to give you an idea of how the emotions can go through. You're going to go through high highs, you're going to go through low lows, and it's more than one. In fact, the more complex and the harder that decision is to make, the more you're going to go through these different emotional states. So you might have a really high high and then a really low low, and then you go back and forth a little bit. And you're going to go back and forth between these different states until you finally hit a place of neutral. And that's where you're going to actually make the decision. So I'm going to give you an example of this in just a moment, but I want you to just be aware of the cyclical process and the emotional states that are right for people with a solar plexus authority to listen to. So if you've ever made a decision when you were really excited, right? Let's think about buyer's remorse, right? That's a great example of something where you go and you're like, oh, this is the perfect gift for my partner, or oh yeah, I need to buy that sweater right now, whatever it is. Or maybe it's something bigger, but just even in the smallest senses, when we oftentimes do those actions and make those decisions in those heightened emotional states, we end up doubting them later. And if we're making the emotions in the very low states, we end up not seeing all the possibilities. We end up letting fear overtake what's happening. And we oftentimes put a lot more doubt and negativity towards a situation. So maybe, for example, you go to a networking event and you're trying to connect with some people. Well, if you're in this low emotional state and you're doubting whether or not you're good enough to even talk to people, that's going to show through and you're never going to initiate those conversations. So setting yourself up to recognize that these emotional states are natural, they're going to happen, and to allow you to feel both the ups and the downs before actually making a decision is really important. One other thing I want to point out is what this feels like. So because of where the solar plexus is located physically in your body, this is aligned with the chakra systems, you're likely going to feel a physical response like in your upper abdomen. So between your belly button and your sternum. That is most likely where your solar plexus is going to be. I have had some of my clients tell me that they feel it as high as their heart when they're starting to go through this process. And it also feels like a sense of nothing almost, which can be a little bit disorienting for some people. Right? If you are so used to being on the roller coaster of those emotions, when you let this whole process run through and you finally hit that state of, oh, I'm at peace. I'm feeling a sense of satisfaction. The pressure is gone from this decision. I am feeling lighter. When that happens, that's when you know that you've arrived at your final decision. And again, we're going to go through an example of this in just a second, but I want you to really allow yourself to think about what these states look like. And then if you're interacting with somebody else who's a solar plexus decision maker, you have to give them the time to go through these emotions before pressing them in on a decision. Because when the decisions are made in either the high highs or the low lows, those are the decisions that don't energetically serve us. And that's going to often cause us to wonder if we made the right decision, right? That's one of the biggest things that we want to get from this is we want to know, like, okay, did I make the right decision? Well, as a solar plexus decision maker, you do have to let that whole process. Now, you're likely going, so Missy, that's great, but problem, I can't wait that long to make decisions. In my job, like I have to answer things right away. Like that's not an okay scenario. So how do I work with that? So there's a couple answers for really coping with it. And one of the best solutions is to proactively work through some of your decisions and your emotions. So let's say, for example, that you know there's going to be a big fundraiser coming up at your job in the next couple months. And you know that you're going to have to make decisions on which vendors to work with. And you know that you're going to have to hire somebody for the position. And you know that you're going to have to make catering decisions, whatever it might be. As part of that, knowing that it's coming, you can start actually processing your high highs and low lows before the decisions actually come up. So that way, when the decision is actually asked of you, you've already gone through the emotional states and you're ready to make the decision. So for example, let's say that you know that you're going to have to hire somebody for this event. Well, how would it feel if you hired someone who was highly detail oriented? How would it feel if you hired someone who had a challenge talking directly to the customer? How would you feel if you had a person who was very creative, but not necessarily able to present the information to your manager? Whatever the needs are, you can start to go through these what if scenarios and check in how you feel for each of those. So again, you're essentially priming yourself. So when the question actually comes up and you've done the interview and you're like, is this the person I want to hire? You already have that feeling and you're able to go directly to that sense of neutrality when it comes up. So that solar plexus is, again, the biggest and most common decision-making process that's out there. The second most common one we have is our sacral. So what does that look like? Well, whereas the solar plexus is a longer process and a very emotionally based process, the sacral decision making is much more physical. It's something that you're going to feel. So even in the solar plexus, you very well may have feelings in your body right around that abdomen area, but you might not at all with the solar plexus, and that's perfectly fine. It's just starting to increase your awareness of where you're feeling things. The sacral is very, very physical. It also has a very verbal cue set to it. So with the sacral, you'll often hear people actually verbalize like a yes or a no or an uh-huh or an uh-uh, or maybe like even a hum, like right? Like that starts to give you the idea of interest and intention going into it. So with these different cues, the sacral is something that we want to be looking for. But it can also be just a very physical kind of gut response. And these are just some examples of how it might feel for you. The more that you play with listening to that sacral response, the easier it will be to start to recognize it. So for example, you might feel a warm sensation for a yes and a cold sensation for a no. You might feel kind of an overall sense of peace or sense of satisfaction just really coming over your whole body, or you might feel like a really sharp pain, particularly in your gut area. You also might feel like an opening for a yes versus a tightness for a no. So for me, I tend to feel a very warm, opening feeling in my gut when I have a yes. And I tend to get this really sharp, not necessarily cold, but it is definitely a sharp, like tightness. So there's more what I get. So I get the kind of a combination of all of these. And I learned how my body responds by starting to pay attention when I'm looking at my sacral decision making and actually asking myself different questions and practicing with it. So the more that you start to know what your cues look like, the easier it's going to be to apply and to trust those decision-making responses when you actually come up with them. So let's go through an actual scenario with both of these. So going back to the solar plexus. So this is a high, low emotional processing. And one of the biggest keys with the solar plexus is that when you get to neutral, you do need to stop. It can be very easy that when you get to neutral to almost freak yourself out and go, oh, wait, there's no pressure anymore. I'm not there. I got to be missing something. Nope. If you get to neutral, you really got to the right answer and you should stop with what that is. So let's run through this scenario where we have someone who's looking at a job opportunity. All right. So they have two different jobs that are available to them. They have one job that is more money, but less flexibility. And they have another job opportunity that's less money, but more flexibility. And I'm intentionally keeping this vague so that way you're not going into the logistical pieces of this, right? This decision, yes, there is going to be a point where like, well, yeah, so much money can balance things out. Like I need to look at things on even footing. But what I want you to take away from this exercise is really how the solar process decision-making really works in an emotional cycle. So again, it's not logic-based. And as you start to go through and make your decisions, the more that you're able to trust your approach, the less you're going to find yourself wavering. And also the easier that's going to be for you to uphold your decisions. So when we're not sure of our own decisions, it's really easy to also be influenced by other people and to think that they're judging us. And the better that we get at practicing with our authority and listening to it, that's going to really help us. So depending on the size of the actual decision, the complexity of it, how long you've been sitting with it, if you're a solar plexus decision maker, that is going to impact how quickly we can get to this decision. But ultimately, we're really saying, what are these emotions that I'm actually feeling? So some questions that you could ask yourself if you're a solar plexus decision maker is, how will making more money make me actually feel? How would taking a pay cut actually make me feel? And it's not just like good or bad. I go a little bit deeper with those emotions. Are you feeling excited about more money? Are you feeling a sense of ease at having more money? Are you feeling fear at having less money? Are you going, actually, that's okay. You know, that's not that big of a deal. What are those emotions? Actually define them. Another question that we could ask ourselves in terms of the flexibility, how will working longer hours or shorter hours make you actually feel? And maybe there's a point where you go and you're like, you know, a couple hours, I'm okay with that. But if it gets to that point where I'm working, 70-hour weeks, that's too much. That's going to exhaust me. That's going to make me not just physically be exhausted, but I'm going to be really sad that I don't have that time with my family to spend. Or if it's shorter hours, okay, great. Now I can go and pick my kids up after school. Well, how does that make me feel? Oh, well, that's awesome. I get to spend that time with them. And I'm really looking forward to those opportunities. Again, it depends on what your particular situation is, but focusing on the emotions as opposed to just writing out the list. And one more example here, how well does this job actually align with my strengths? So an example here, when we start looking at the strengths and we think about the emotions, is with your strengths in human design, every single little line in your picture, so if you're taking a look at it, means something different. That's where your superpowers live, all of those colored in spaces. And so as we start to look at those strengths, how does it feel if you're leaning into your strengths? Like, are you doing a job that's really using all of your abilities? Or are you doing a job that you're just going through the motions? And how does that make you feel? How can you find that job that is most aligned with your strengths? And is this, which one's doing it? So notice that as I went through these questions, I kept going back to, how do you feel? How do you feel? How do you feel? And with these different questions, it's going to be an important process to stick to that emotional answer, as opposed to, well, if I work longer hours, the more money I'm going to end up making an extra $5 an hour. And so that lets me get the extra coffees, and I can send the kids to aftercare, or send them to the summer camp, whatever it is. That's starting to get into rationalization. And it's really difficult to get out of that, especially because generally, in terms of our conditioning, we're meant to want to explain things logically. And again, I'm not saying that the logic is not part of your process at all. That logic, that being able to send the kids to summer camp, that decision to work weekends, how do those make you feel? And that's then where the decision needs to be coming from. So I'd like to just take a moment now and just pause this and think about that burning question that you wrote down. And even if you're not a solar plexus authority, I want you to process through what this looks like. Okay, so now that you've had the opportunity to really play with this solar plexus process with your own question, right? It gives you that understanding, first of all, if it's you, right? You've made your decision now. You've gotten to a point where you're feeling more neutral and you have that clarity. And if it is a really big decision and maybe you didn't get to it right this second, still recognizing where you are in that emotional process allows you to move closer to your right decision. So now that we've talked about the solar plexus, let's take a look at that sacral, right? So the sacral side, so if you have this sacral listed as your authority, this is something that's going to really be about binary questions, right? Thinking about yes and no's, as well as option A, option B. So when you can get your questions that you're asking yourself into yes or no's, great. That's really an ideal way. That's the easiest way for your sacral to respond. However, it does also respond well to binary choices, especially if you've honed it and practiced with it. So a binary example might be, do I want Mexican tonight, or do I want Italian tonight? Now, the answer is always Mexican, just for reference. But that's still something where it's a binary choice. And so when you start to ask questions and you start to listen to how your body's actually responding, again, looking for those very physical responses, particularly in your gut, whether it's an expansion, whether it's a sensation of temperature change, maybe it's just you actually saying yes or no out loud to something. These binary options start to show up more and more. And as you recognize them for happening, you're able to trust them more and more as you go through. So a couple tips here with the binary questions is that if you ask yourself a question and you get kind of a fuzzy response, you're like, well, Italian sounds good, Mexican sounds good. Okay, that means that your body needs more, a bigger breakdown. So in the case of the food choice, we could say, all right, well, maybe Italian, maybe Mexican. You go, okay, well, do I want something salty or sweet? Right? Okay, well, I do want something salty. Do I want something that has meat in it, maybe? And that can help you start to break into your questions. So when you start to really think then about what's on the Mexican menu versus what's on the Italian menu, you can start getting more and more specific with it instead of just keeping it high level. Now, that fuzzy response is normal, especially when you first get started. So as soon as you catch yourself going, I don't know, maybe this idea, as soon as you start going back and through those pros and cons, stop yourself and break the question down further. Ask a different question that's binary, go a little bit deeper, go a little bit more specific. So with these examples, let's just take a look at that same scenario from the solar plexus. So let's say that I'm looking at this and I go, should I take the job with more money and less flexibility? I'm probably going to go, I don't know, maybe, I think so, I'm not sure. So another question, a different way we can rephrase it is, will working the less flexible schedule impact my time with my family or my social life? My sacral is going to say, no, actually, I think I'm good. I can adapt to that. I can plan around that. All right, cool. I got a cool no. then I ask another question. I go, but there's still something more, right? Because I was fuzzy at the beginning if that was the right one. So it must not be the flexibility. There must be something else. All right. So burnout. That seems like something that's likely, right? With this new job that's going to be more money, more hours. So will the more money job burn me out? My sacral says, yeah, I think it will. However, there's still something kind of irking me. Right? It's not a strong yes. It's a yes question mark that my sacral gave me. So that means I'm not done. I need to keep going and keep asking those yes, no questions. So I can say, is the level of burnout worth the money? And I go, no, that doesn't feel like it's the right thing. But what about that career advancement? That was another pro con that I had floating around in my head. Okay, all right. So at this point, I recognize the flexible schedule is not actually an issue. I've recognized that the burnout is definitely a problem, but I do think that I can handle it. Is it worth the career advancement opportunity? And again, I kind of get this fuzzy feeling like, I don't know. Does it? I'm not sure. So I have to ask deeper questions. Does the career advancement opportunity excite me? And there I go, oh, yes, absolutely. And can I manage the burnout? Yeah, I feel like I can. And then I end with, and this is the last bullet point on here, for big decisions, check in with your final answer. Are there any other concerns about this job? And now my sacral says no. So whereas initially I was addressing the money and I was addressing the flexibility because they came up, that did drive me into going deeper. It drove me into thinking about the burnout. It drove me into thinking about the career advancement. And I'm now able to say, I've gone through all my choices. I've given some yes, no components. And yeah, the more money, less flexible job is the best one, as long as I'm successfully managing my burnout. So through this consistent process of really asking those binary questions, touching into your body, and recognizing that you're going deeper when you have the questions can really give you that opportunity with the sacral to bring it home. So just like where we practice with the solar plexus, let's practice your burning question now with the sacral authority process. And even if you're a solar plexus authority, I want you to still do this exercise from the standpoint of a sacral decision maker, simply so that way you can get comfortable with it. You can understand where other people are coming from. So you can go ahead and pause this, and I'll give you a few moments to think through how to apply this process to your question. Awesome. So now that you've had the opportunity to practice all of these, let's just recap where we are. So when you came into this, you were really concerned that you were just struggling, right? You were really struggling with overwhelm. You were collecting all the information to make all sorts of decisions in your life, but you were exhausted by all the options that were coming up, and you were really looking for some way to actually come up with a right answer. As part of today's session, you're now able to essentially walk away and say, well, not only do I know information about the authorities, I know the decision-making strategy that 80% of people are actually meant to do. I know which of these is right for me. I know how to know when I've made the right decision, and I've learned how to assess the pros and cons without feeling I'm missing anything, right? I can confidently go into that and know when I've hit that answer. So with this process, you've learned all these pieces, you've learned how to apply this to a particular question of yours. And going forward, I encourage you, the next time a question comes up, practice this. Start to take note of the decisions that are coming up, big and small, and tap into whatever your authority is, because that authority is really what's going to help drive you to the right direction, to know when you've come up with that right decision. And that's going to dramatically increase your confidence as you move through your life. And the more you practice with it, the easier you're going to get those verbal cues from your body. And also the easier it's going to be to get out of your head, so that way you're not complicating those decisions anymore. I'm thankful that you joined me in today's session, and I look forward to chatting with you again.